Hey, it's the Daily Word. It's been a while since I've been here. It was the beginning of Acts, but here we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. So if you haven't read this passage, that's okay. Usually I tell you, hey, go read it, but it might be more helpful to listen to this and then go read the chapter. Either way, I hope this is helpful. We're in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, like I said, and the subject is still meat offered to idols. And what Paul is doing in chapter 9 is he's making himself an example, showing that he was an example of what he said in chapter 8. And so the big idea here is there are rights and responsibilities that Christians have. And Paul had many rights, not only as a Christian, but also as an apostle. But he was responsible. He thought not what's best for me. He thought not, how do I get what I want? How do I do what I want? No, for Paul, it was what's best for others, what best advances the gospel, what best shows Christ in my life. Those were the things that mattered. And so in this first section, what we're going to call this section, Paul argues for his rights. That's verses 1 to 14. He is an apostle. He could have demanded financial support from the church. It's the right thing to do, he argues, and it's the biblical thing to do. However, he refused to claim that right. Look at verse 11. He said, if we sowed spiritual things among you, if we planted spiritual things among you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? If others share this right over you, do we not more? Nevertheless, we did not use this right for financial support, but we endure all things so that we will cause no hindrance to the gospel of Christ. Drop down to verse 14. So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. So he's saying, I could have that's even the Lord's command, that those who preach the gospel get their living from the gospel. But he said, I didn't assert that right. I didn't demand that. I didn't force you to give that to me. And we're going to see why starting in verse 15. But before we go there, the question is, are there any rights that you assert in your life as a Christian that non-Christians look at you asserting those rights and it actually turns them off to Christ? These aren't obedience or disobedience things. These are just practical, everyday preference kinds of things. That's the whole idea here, is that we will put our rights, we'll put our preferences, we'll put those things aside, those privileges, we'll put them aside because we have a responsibility that overshadows that, and that responsibility is advancing the gospel with people. The second section that we'll look at, we'll call Paul abandons his rights. So he asserts his rights at the beginning of the chapter, and then he abandons them, starting in verse 15. In his missionary endeavors in Corinth, he says there he was ministering for free. He was making his money by making tents for people. And what he says there is he abandoned his right to financial support by doing that. He said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to focus on making money by making tents, a side job, in order so that I can focus on the gospel, making it free of charge. Notice he does this, verse 18. What then is my reward? That when I preach the gospel, I may offer the gospel without charge. Why? So as not to make full use of my right in the gospel, even though I could demand it. I didn't assert it because I wanted, in my missionary activities, I wanted to offer the gospel free of charge. We should avoid our rights, in other words, if it hurts the reputation of Christ, whatever those rights may be. Why did he do this? Because souls were more valuable to him than a paycheck. They're far more. And so, in fact, he wanted to win as many people as possible. And nothing was going to get in the way of that for him. Look at verse 19. Though I am free from all men, I have made myself a slave to all. Why? So that I may win more. So that I could see God use me to save more people. So to the Jew, I become like a Jew in order to win the Jew. To the non-Jew, I become like a non-Jew to win the non-Jew. To the strong, I become strong. To the weak, I become weak. I become all things. Notice verse 22. Become all things to all men, so that by all means I may save some. He wasn't going to let anything stand in the way of getting the gospel to people and seeing God save every kind of person. Nothing mattered. None of those preference things were going to get in the way of advancing the gospel. Oh, to have that kind of zeal for the lost. I'm going to do everything. I'm going to jump over every barrier in order to reach the lost. So this life, how did he do that? What was it that drove him? This life wasn't what mattered to Paul. It didn't matter most. He lived this life for the next life. Look at verse 24. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? We all know that from sporting events. So he says, run in such a way, live your life in such a way that you win the prize. It's not the prize of salvation. That's not what this passage is about at all. This passage is about eternal rewards. Rewards for how you lived this life, how you lived your life for Christ in this life. There's a poem out there by C.T. Studd, and it's called Only What's Done for Christ Will Last. And maybe you've heard it before. It's only one life, 'twill soon be past. Only what's done for Christ will last. And he talks about how those words, that phrase, he heard that and how it arrested his attention. And he said, wait a minute. There is coming a day when my breath is going to run out, when the synapses aren't going to fire in my brain anymore, when my heart is going to stop, and I'm going to be transferred into the next life, and I'm going to spend eternity in that next life. And it wasn't, the song isn't about salvation, the poem, I mean. It's about rewards. And he says, what am I doing with my life? What am I doing with my life to maximize rewards there? See, we often live this life wanting to maximize all the rewards here. Get as much as we can, do as much as we can, enjoy as much as we can here before we die. And Paul would say that's so backwards. I'm going to get everything out of my life. He's saying, I'm going to run, I'm going to self-control, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I'm rewarded in the next life. I'm going to get everything out of the way in order to win more people to Christ. That is a zeal that is admirable. If you're looking for passages to memorize, the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, it's one of those mountaintop places where it just gives the perspective on life that we all need. That this life is really not what life is all about. This life is simply preparation for the next in a world where we're going to live forever. So I hope this passage is helpful. Your rights, that's really not what it's all about. It is about sacrificing your rights in order to win people to Christ. If your rights, if those would get in the way of seeing people saved. Hope that was helpful. See you next time.